From Matthew chapter 15 verse 21. Jesus then withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon, and a Canaanite woman came from those parts to meet him, crying, "Son of David, have pity on me. My daughter is tormented by a devil." But he said not a word in reply. His disciples came and urged him, "Send her away. See how she comes, shouting after us." Jesus replied, "I was sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and to them alone." But the woman came and fell at his feet and cried, "Help me, sir." Jesus replied, "It is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." "True, sir," she answered, "and yet the dogs eat the scraps that fall from their master's table." Hearing this, Jesus replied, "What faith you have! Let it be as you wish." And from that moment, her daughter was restored to health. Well, it's not a particularly easy reading for us to hear in an age when Black Lives Matter has been on our agenda, and we have been made to think very deeply about those prejudices, conscious and unconscious, that mar the life of our society. And around the world, in many places, we're having to recognize a very damaging history when one nation has occupied and conquered another, and indigenous people have been left out on the margins. And this is the story of an indigenous person. She's very deliberately called a Canaanite, someone whose history and heritage are rooted in the land and predate the arrival, actually, of the people of Israel. We could make excuses, of course. We could say that Jesus is a man of his time, and here are very hard set prejudices in the society in which he lives and works. That clear distinction between Israel and the Canaanite cultures around about. We could say that there's a theological story here, because Jesus, one could argue, wants the world to know who God is, the God Yahweh, the God who is only known through his relationship with the people of Israel, how he has brought a slave people from captivity into freedom and into the promised land. It's that God of compassion and love, of saving love, that the world needs to know. And so Israel, first of all, needs to hear Jesus' message. Scholars will debate as to exactly how insulting that term dogs really would have been. Perhaps it means more like puppy, and we can soften it off a little bit. I don't think that really, though, washes at the end of the day. And perhaps we could just notice that in the very beginning of the encounter, Jesus keeps silence. So there's obviously something going on there. Jesus doesn't react immediately with those prejudices of his age, but there's a stopping to think and take stock. But I think the best commentary for me on this is a very ancient one, because it comes from the Book of Common Prayer, 16th century words, which draw on this passage and other gospel passages which have a similar theme. And in the approach to the communion table, "We do not presume to come to this thy table, O merciful Lord, trusting in our own righteousness, but in thy manifold and great mercies. We are not worthy so much as to gather up the crumbs under thy table. But thou art the same Lord, whose property is always to have mercy. Grant us then, therefore, gracious Lord, so to eat the flesh of thy dear Son, Jesus Christ, and to drink his blood, that our sinful bodies may be made clean by his body, and our souls washed through his most precious blood, and that we may evermore dwell in him, and he in us." Well, I don't think in this passage from Matthew's Gospel there's more than the tiniest of hint of any kind of Eucharistic meaning. But surely there is something about that presumption. How do we come to the Lord as to the Lord's table? Is it with the presumption that we have a right to God's love and God's mercy and God's salvation? There's actually quite a lot in Jesus' teaching and the rest of the Gospels where Jesus warns against that kind of presumption. Those who seek out the best places, who want to be seen in the public square as the righteous ones of Israel. There's that time when Jesus gives the advice, if you come to a feast, a banquet, take the lowliest seat and wait to be invited up, rather than taking the most prestigious seat and then to be asked to be demoted. There is something here that I think is often true, where those on the outside have important lessons to teach to those who presume that they are on the inside. The Canaanite woman, for all of her lack of credentials as someone fit to receive the salvation that God has in Jesus Christ, nonetheless is the one who can teach the lesson of humility. And I think we still need to rage against those prejudices and those distinctions which keep someone like the Canaanite woman on the outside and keep others in a more privileged position. We need to rage against all of those prejudices that persist in our society. But even as we do so, to recognize the one on the outside has something to teach those who would presume that they are on the inside, a most significant lesson on what it means to stand before the God of the ages, in whose hand all creation holds, and whose love is the source of all goodness and all life and all creation. Do not presume to come to your Lord trusting in your own goodness, but acknowledging your dependence on his grace and his mercy.